Please.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I think we've got one listener in the panel already. I suggest we wait for, say, 3, 4, 5 minutes, such that the audience is filled with some people, and then we start. We've got 1.5 hours. We've got 3 speakers and not full, so we've got ample time.
What is the time for presentation?
That is a very good question. I haven't got an idea. But as we've got 1.5 hours and 3 speakers.
Yes, it's 15-20 minutes.
15 to 20 minutes and then question.
Yeah.
With discussion?
Plus discussion, probably.
Plus
Yeah, I don't think that we
20 minutes.
That we need too much for discussion.
Okay.
You know how it works. Okay, let's start. I mean, otherwise we're just wasting time. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to session number 15 on economic financial aspects of the energy market. As I said before, we've got 3 talks in this session. One of the speakers is still missing. I hope he'll dial in, as he's from Chile. That might be due to the time lag. Nonetheless, I'm very happy to welcome the first speaker, who's Şevkat Özgür Speitmann. She's a PhD student at the University of Vienna in the program of Business, Economics and Statistics. And her talk will be about financial transparency and cross-border M&A in the extractives industry. Please go ahead. I'm looking very much forward to your talk.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's a great pleasure to attend the Energy Symposium today. Thanks for the introduction. So yes, I'm doing my PhD studies at the University of Vienna, working under the former chair of Industry, Energy and Environment. Today, I will present one of my latest research papers co-authored with Raphael Speitmann. And this study will be about cross-border mergers and acquisitions and the impact of financial transparency. Let me share my screen. Please kindly confirm if you could see the screen.
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. Then let me start. So let me begin with the content of the study and what we do, why we do, and how we are doing. So in this study, we examined a certain financial transparency regulation called country-by-country reporting and its impact on cross-border mergers and acquisitions. This study is focused on sector-specific and firm and country-level setup. So we are looking for the impact of country-by-country reporting and M&A activity in extractive industry, covering European countries and Canada. So this is a reporting regulation, which is mandatory for European and Canadian multinational extractive firms. I will go for the details of the country by country reporting in the following slides, but why we do this study is why it's important, because as we know that extractive industry, especially oil and gas and mining and also other natural resources management, play a crucial role in global economy and important for energy security. And it's such a complex and dynamic environment, and extractive industry is subject to corruption, misuse of funds, and financial flows. And that makes that from the investments perspective, financial transparency is very important, and it became in the recent years a global phenomenon, for instance, for the oil and gas and mining industry. So certain regulations, such as country-by-country reporting, is to promote financial transparency in this industry, and also promote for the more transparent view on investments, flows to various host countries, target countries, and payments to host governments. So, however, there is a little research on the impact of financial disclosure regulations on mergers and acquisitions, and it's highly relevant for policymakers, future policy implications. And also there is a policy relevant because by the mid-2024, similar financial transparency rules will be introduced in the European Union. So, and also not just for extractive industries, but also for some other industries. So therefore, this study is an example of a sector-specific firm and country level setup from an extractive industry, how the certain financial transparency rules, reporting rules are impacting the investments. How we do this, we set up a differences analysis. So basically we are looking for the affected firms from Europe and Canada, comparing to non-affected global firms as a control group, where the country-by-country reporting is not mandatory. So when we look at the prior transparency initiatives and how country-by-country reported was adopted and created, so there is a prior initiative called the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, founded in 2011. However, the difference between country-by-country reporting and the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative is that country-by-country reported is a mandatory reporting rules. So the firms from European Economic Area and Canada, including UK, once a year has to report on their investments to different countries. And it's increased the transparency. The aim is to increase the transparency and accountability of the host governments in the extractive industry. So the country-by-country reporting is for logging and extractive industries. It's based on the directive from 2013 from European Parliament. However, the implementation was between 2015 to 2017. So it's a staggered international implementation, which gives time to the countries during this period to implement this reporting regulation. So it gives an interesting setup for a quasi-natural experiment to identify causal effects. So public country-by-country reporting contains disaggregated financial information, so various tax payments and other payments to host governments. And it's an open, accessible information for the civil society, non-governmental organization, and it receives quite attention of the media as well. So when we look at the prior literature, it's a growing literature in the financial transparency and the relationship with the mergers and acquisition investments. However, there is a lot of studies in general in mergers and acquisitions, or oil and gas and mining industry, extractive industry, mergers and acquisitions. What we could see is that, for example, from Rose and Walpin from 2004, they could show that higher investor protection, better accounting standards, better law increases the number of mergers and acquisitions deal. And high standards in institutions, financial transparency, strict legislation can create additional cost to counterparts, and especially to the acquirers of cross-border mergers and acquisition. In overall, in oil and gas industry and in mining, impact of politics or policy changes and regulations are seen for mergers and acquisition investments, changing the directions of the flows or having various effects on the investments. And in the recent studies, through the country-by-country reporting, we can see that in 2016, Johnson and Larson could show that there is a negative impact on the share price reaction for the European extractive industry and around the announcement date of the public country-by-country reporting. And in another study, we could see that in the extractive industry, within the public country-by-country reporting, it leads to reduced capital expenditures of regulated firms and decrease the investments. So we are inspired by those studies, and we are looking for what is the effect of country-by-country reporting on cross-border mergers and acquisitions for the European and Canadian extractive firms. So this is a theoretical channel for all, a theoretical channel of the public country-by-country reporting. It may negatively impact the M&A activity because it's a reputational pressure for there is a reputational pressure from activists, from NGOs, and also from tax authorities. So now I will show you some output of how country-by-country reporting from a country level perspective, because it's a mandatory reporting once a year for the firms. They had to report country level and then project level their investment to various host countries. So we can see here is an example from TotalEnergies from 2018, after they implemented the country-by-country reporting regulation. So we can see that in Europe or in Africa to different countries, what are the total payments of taxes, royalties, dividends, infrastructure improvements, and what is the total payments into host countries that they invested in within a certain year. And in the second slide, we could see that this is per country, per project level, what were the payments. So it's just a part of an example, but that's the idea that the extractive industry firms has to report in such a way, first country level and then a project level, their payments to host governments. As I mentioned at the beginning, implementation of CBCR was during 2 years. So it's offers an interesting research setting, as the legal implementation dates varies across European Economic Area member states and Canada. So for example, we could see that Norway was implementing in 2014, but then when we look at Ireland, that's a latecomer in the 2017, and we can see that for various member states, the implementation year when it comes to force to date, it's changing. So let me start with the empirical part. So how we design our study and the model. So basically we collected cross-border mergers and acquisition transactions between 2010 and 2019. The acquirer parent firm is headquartered in the European Economic Area or in Canada, as mentioned at the beginning, that's still including UK. So we didn't want to include the pandemic term. So that's why we stopped our data collection at the end of 2019. Then we filter for the cross-border mergers and acquisition deals. And our group is the non-disclosing firm and disclosing firm. So the disclosing firm, which are from the European Economic Area member states and Canada, that has to report. And in our setup, so we apply for a count data model, POSA, and binomial regression. And we also include some vector of control variables. So we control for the firm size, profitability, assets of the firms. And our dependent variable is the number of mergers and acquisition deals, deal count. So the number of mergers and acquisition deals that the acquirers completed during this time. So we look for in 3 years window, so before 3 years and after 3 years of the implementation of the CBCR. to see the effect of such a financial transparency regulation. I would like to explain the identification strategy in our model. So basically, our treatment firms, disclosing firms, are from Europe and Canada. When let's say that a headquartered firm, and it is an example, so we can take OMV from Austria. If OMV has also some other firms in different countries, so we take into account OMV as a global ultimate owner, and all OMV's daughter companies are also included in the group. Then we are looking for their cross-border investment in oil and gas and mining. So we focus on only in here oil and gas and mining investments. And the other group is the non-disclosing rest of the world. When we look at the results, so what we found, that the effect of public country by country reporting on cross-border mergers and acquisitions, we always have two models. In the first models, we didn't include the control variables, but in the second and fourth model, we include the control variables because which is important. And then what we could see is that the results suggest a relative to non-disclosing firms. The disclosing firms has a reduction on their mergers and acquisitions deal, which is about 30%. So it's a negative and statistical significant difference coefficient. And then for robustness test, we look for within the disclosing firms, what are the effects? So we compare large and small size firms from the disclosing group. Again, we run 4 types with control variables and without control variables. And again, we could see that there is a negative and significant impact after the CBCR implementation. And this negative effect is more concentrated in large extracting firms, because big firms and large firms in the oil and gas and mining industry are more close to the attention of media, more close to the attention of NGOs. This might be driven by this effect. So the study is still in a preliminary result, and we are still trying to improve our study. But however, we could see that when we are looking for the number of mergers and acquisition deals during this period for the European member states and Canada, we could see that CBCR comparing to non-disclosing firms has a negative impact. So transparency regulation on changing the M&A behavior affected extractive firms. So the results indicate that large and visible firms might carry the bulk of the disclosure cost and reduce their cross-border mergers and acquisitions more strongly comparing to small-sized firms or mid-sized firms. However, we don't control for firms' home host country characteristic. GDP or the level of corruption, especially the level of corruption, might also play a role. So that would be our next steps. And also within, including with other control variables, the results might change. So we would like to test for further with different variables. And we think that the study is relevant, and for the policymakers, it highlights the spillover effects of mandatory transparency regulation on cross-border investments, and it has a policy implication for future directions of the mergers and acquisition in the extractive industry. So I might go quite quick, but that would be the end of my presentation. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for that very interesting talk. I've read your abstract before, and so I've jotted down a couple of questions that I actually have. And as we're a rather small group, I think we can spend some minutes on discussions. I find the study and the results quite intriguing. I mean, from an intuitive point of view, one could say the more transparent or the more transparency you require from a company to be disclosed, the less open it might be in its investment decisions. What I'm asking myself, and I'm coming from the energy and not the M&A business, is that actually a good thing or is it a bad thing? So what would be
the policy implications that we can draw from this. So either I could say it shows a rather negative dynamic because transparency is limited, or enforced transparency on one hand is limiting economic activity on the other side. But on the other hand, I could say that M&A activities, in particular cross-border M&A activities, they foster the generation of multinational entities which might grow so big that they can use market power. So their enforced transparency would be a lever or an instrument to more or less or hinder or put barriers in front of too quick agglomeration of market power. Is that a naive interpretation, or how do you see this
Yes, definitely. Thank you very much for the question. So I would say that, okay, on one hand, it's a policy tool, let's say that, and it's promote more transparency, financial transparency on investments, especially in the extractive industry. When we think of oil and gas, especially, we could say that, okay, sometimes the direction of the flows or the illicit financial flows or the corruption, high risk of corruption, this is well-known characteristic of, for example, oil and gas and mining industry. So in one hand, it's promote more transparency, but on the other hand, it's a disadvantage from the market perspective because of competitiveness, because this is a very disaggregated level of information that the European country, member states and Canada has to once a year show on details of their investments very openly. So this is an open information, accessible information. On one hand, of course, for NGOs, for civil society, for tax authorities, it increases the transparency. So it's a very nice policy tool that very clearly, not just country level, but also project level, you are showing the certain taxes, payments to host governments, and it's a benefit for host governments. So it's idea is to reduce corruption risk. But on the other hand, from competitiveness, from the market point of view, or an M&A used as an inorganic growth strategy by oil and gas firms or mining industry, and M&A is one of the characteristics of extractive industries. This might also bring, as we could see in our results, negative impact on the M&A behavior. But then the next question would be that, since we are talking about here, this is a mandatory regulation, different than the prior initiatives for European Economic Area in Canada, is this member states and the firms from those countries are investing to where? So that might be the future research questions, because are they considering then now less investments in extractive industry to any different like target in the globe, or is there more investment to renewables? Or so the whole M&A market for the acquirers from Europe, what are the directions? But clearly we could see that, okay, from the competitiveness, it brings a negative impact. But on the other hand, from the policy perspective, it's something that the Europe would like to achieve. So it's more transparency on financial investments of extractive industry. So the interpretation of this results and the study might go to two directions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but thank you very much. That's very fascinating. So I've got two. That sparks two more questions. You know, it's exponentially. So one is. So we see that there is a trade-off between transparency and investment activity, in particular M&A. We're talking about like redirection of investment and capital flows. Transparency is a very good thing. I'm very much in favor to investment, to transparency. But the question is then if there's too. So what we see is if there's too much forced transparency due to cost or reputational damage, however we interpret that. Investment activity is going down. So do you think, or do you believe or guess that there is a sort of sweet spot in the sense that a certain level of transparency could be enforced without hampering too much investment activity? And is there a chance for policymakers to find that sweet spot? Because the extremes are probably, if there's no transparency, M&A activity will skyrocket, and if you have to disclose everything, nobody's going to invest. So there must be some optimum in between.
I think there are many elements, especially in M&A in oil and gas, that we should look for. And this is just between 2010 and 19. And here we really focus on one angle of after CBCR. So we look for, okay, what was like 3 years before and 3 years after. But if we would extend the time period of this study, but then we need to also bring like different questions to the M&A market in oil and gas and mining to define some more trends. So not just because of financial transparency regulation, but what were other effects on the market. So what was happening that we could see that or define or analyze how this was impacting mergers and acquisition activity in oil and gas and mining firms. And so I think it's what we focus on needs to be also then extended study and to some other questions, because I think here it's very just focusing on to see the country by country reporting effect, but we cannot say that just because of one regulation introduced and it's mandatory for European member states, extractive firms and Canada, that this is a conclusion.
Yeah, last question, and we can't. Probably we could talk about this the whole day. You focus very much on the extractive industry, and you said there was a certain level of corruption that has to be fought using the transparency regulations. Do you have a gut feeling, or is there any literature how this, like the relation between forced transparency on investment and M&A activity?
Yeah, that's very, yeah, thank you. Yes. So in the literature in M&A in oil and gas, so there are studies that saying that corruption has a negative impact on the number of mergers and acquisitions, but there are also studies that showing that actually there are more investment to corrupt countries. So it's not conclusive results. So it's during the different waves of mergers and acquisition in oil and gas, the directions of the flows are changing. The roles of host countries or like the acquirers are changing, but we can definitely see a close relationship within the level of corruption and the mergers and acquisition investment. And here, what we could see is that in Europe, within this regulation, what is aimed to promote transparency, that's comparing to global other competitors, the European firms has to give detailed information on their projects and their payments to host governments. So there is no room for any corruption. So the idea is to promote more transparency and reduce like the high risk of corruption. But on the other hand, when we look at the M&A waves in oil and gas for the last 2 decades, I know in the prior literature in oil and gas M&A, there are many studies empirically proven that corruption is not for sure impacting negatively, or sometimes it impacts also. I can't say this positively, but you could see that there were more investments to corrupt countries. So that's why I think would be our next step interesting to also maybe include in our model. So like level of corruption also from host countries, it's important, I think, to test.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Very interesting paper. I wish you all the best for the next levels of your research.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Huge.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
So the second speaker hasn't yet arrived. Thus, I think we just jump to the third. Our next speaker is, no, it's not this, it's Stéphanie Monjon. She is a lecturer at the economics department at the Université Paris Dauphine, and holds a PhD from Université Paris Panthéon-Sorbonne, and did a postdoc at the University College in London. So came around in Europe quite a bit. And she's giving a lecture, a talk on the nice title, Selling Under Other Skies When Energy Prices Skyrocket. So a thing that we can all relate to. How do the companies adapt their reporting strategy when energy prices rise? Please, I'm looking very much forward to your talk.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to share my presentation. Yeah. It's okay. Yes, okay. So I don't repeat the title. It's a paper made with Damien Dussault. Before Damien worked at Mines Paris, an engineering school, high school in Paris. Now is at OECD. So the paper is on the impact of energy prices variation on exports patents of French firms. Here, just to give you some example of statements to underline the concern about higher energy prices on competitiveness. For instance, in Harvard Business Review or a report to the French Prime Minister. So everybody in economics know that there is an impact of price of a production factor on competitiveness. Here we focus specifically on energy costs and specifically on exports performances of the French firms. Here, just an illustration of the huge differences in EU. It is maybe surprising, but you see that political choices made in different countries can differ a lot. For Germany, you see that the two green lines with quite opposite choices for households and industries. In France, we have smaller differences, and UK as well. And you see that for industry, we have a different level in these three different countries. And despite the apparent importance of energy for competitiveness and trade performances, there is relatively little theoretical and empirical literature on this issue. We can find mainly paper based on data at the country or at the sectoral level, while the literature in international trade has largely demonstrated the role of firms' heterogeneity. So our objective is to explore the question, what are the firms' export responses to change in the energy costs by using individual data. So to include in an empirical work the conclusion of theoretical models. There is an increasing literature on the macroeconomics of trade and exporting, so a lot of model analyses. We can find theoretical and empirical paper. There are several robust facts about variation in export performance across firms. For instance, across a wide range of country and industry, we find that exporters are larger, more productive, more skill and capital intensive than non-exporting firms. So certainly there is a difference in the consequences of energy price variation. And we will try to understand better this aspect. Here we have a few examples of paper we can find in the literature. For instance, Sato and de Chelprêtre, based on aggregate trade data, and they find that an increase of 10% in the energy price will lead to increase the imports by 0.%. Another example in Chan and Al, the energy consumption are all stages of production are including, and they find that a 1% increase in the exporters' electricity costs leads to a decrease of 0.07% in exports for a sector of average electricity intensity. So we can find in the literature different estimation of the consequence of an increase, a price increase in energy or just electricity price. And so we will examine with new data this question. We use a large panel of French firms from 2001 to 2015. The period is interesting because we have a significant variation of price of energy prices. So not like today, but current variation, but rather important variation. So it's interesting to see, to analyze the way of adapting the strategy for firms. We estimate the effect of energy cost on exports and its margin, so extensive, intensive, and price. We use indicator of that, and we highlight the important differences between large firms and small and medium enterprises, and between energy-intensive firms and non-intensive firms. We show that trade adjustment depends on the firm's characteristic as well as on the export destination. So the database covers the whole manufacturing sector. We merge an energy use datasheet, the French custom dataset, and a fiscal dataset. We have the plant fuel level consumption and expenditure data from the dataset French database. And we have firm product destination value and quantities provided by the French customs. Here we have some statistic on the database. So we have the distribution of the firm depending on the size categories. The size is based on number of employees. So we see that we find the similar characteristics that we can find in paper in the literature. So it suggests that the database, the sample is representative. So a large number of small and medium enterprises, and rather small number of big or very big firms. Here, for the total export by size category, the second figure, we see that the number of firms decrease with a higher size category, and the largest firms have the more important export value. So with a big, a very large interval for small firms, and the interval is smaller and smaller then. Concerning the number of export destination, we see, as expected, rather the large firms, the largest firms are present in important number of countries, of export market, and for smallest firm, it's rather limited foreign presence on foreign markets. In our database, we have information on 4 fuels: electricity, gas, heating oil, and butane propane. There was significant evolution of the energy cost during the period. You can see that this point on the figure, and on average, the energy cost increased from 450 euro per ton oil equivalent in 2001 to 850 per ton oil equivalent in 2005. So during the period, you can see the increase, the important increase. And here, the last figure, I think, on the figure, we see the large between firms variation in fuel prices within industries. So we use a classification NAF. So you have the price electricity on the left, and the natural gas price on the right. And depending on the sector, with the variation depending on the sector, but as well in the sector. So our objective is to evaluate the impact of the changes in energy costs on exports. So you can see the equation we try to estimate. We have on the left the exports outcome, exported the outcome variable for firm I at time t. So we measure the export value, the export unit value for an estimation, an evaluation of the price, the average export value per destination, and the number of export destinations. So at each time we have 4 equations, 4 estimations for these variables. We have the cost of energy is the average energy cost measured by the ratio between expenditure in electricity, natural gas, heating oil, and butane propane in 1,000 euros, and the quantity of that fuels in ton oil equivalent. And we have other control firm level variables like size, inclusion in EU ETS, and so on. So we estimate this equation with a fixed effect estimator, and we control for time invariant and firm specific characteristic. And we had here dummies. We use robust standard error cluster at the firm level. Our identification strategy is to use an exogenous variation in the fuel price as instrumental variable for the energy cost, as in a previous paper. So we use the fixed wage energy price index, the FEPI, like you can see, where we use median price of fuel for 3-digit industry in which the firm I operates at here T, and we use a coefficient to represent the share of fuel in total energy of a firm as a pre-sample year 0, so before at the start of the period. So, and we use this instrumental variable in a control function estimator. So we have two-stage estimation with in a first stage the estimation of the costs, and after we use the residual of this first stage estimation control for the endogeneity of costs. So you can see the second equation where we include the instrumental variable. Here are the first the result for the estimation of the model. For the moment, we look at just the average firm. So we have total export value, export unit value to have information on the price, the number of export destination, and the average export value. So you can see that with OLS there is no significant the average energy cost is not significant, and we have a significant coefficient with the method with the instrumental variable. Here at each time we find significant coefficients. For total export value, we see that the magnitude of the effect is large. A 10% increase in the energy cost leads to an average decrease in the firm's total export value of 3.6%. And the other results show the effect of the energy cost on the different margins of the trade. So we find that firms adapt the unit value of export and particularly their extensive margin. So we can see that there is an evolution of the export unit value. When faced by increased energy costs, so the firms increase their output price and exit markets in which they are no longer competitive. You can see in the number of export destinations there is a decrease of the coefficient. So the strategy, the adaptive strategy of the firm is to exit some markets and to increase the price. The results show also that a negative shock on energy costs lead to exit from some markets, but the volume of export per destination remains stable here in the last equation. So we have, with this variable, we can describe in detail the strategy, the adaptation of the French firm to variation on energy price in terms of price, the number of export destination, and the level of sales in export market where the firms remain. After we introduce heterogeneity to see if there is differences in strategy of firms depending on two dimensions, the size and the energy intensity. For the size, we have dummies equal to 1 if the firms has less than 250 employees. And for intensity, energy intensity, energy intensive firms is in the higher than the 75% of the energy intensity distribution of the 3-digit industry in which it operates. So we have now the result for 4 categories, 4 groups: non-intensive and large firms, intensive and large firms. Intensive is on energy, non-intensive small and medium enterprise, and intensive small and medium enterprises. So here, concerning the total export value, you can see that we have some differences in the coefficient. For instance, the biggest reduction are for in total export value for the large energy intensive firms. Then for small and medium energy intensive firms, but also for large non-energy intensive firms. There is no impact on non-intensive small and medium enterprises. So it's rather, it confirms the relevancy of the result, because yes, its results are rather logical. It could be expected. Here we have, so I have summary the result for our 4 estimation, and you can see that there is big differences in terms of evolution of export unit values, price, the number of export destination, and the sorry, I must move the no. Okay. And the average export value per destination. So my time is now finished. So I give just very short information. You can see that for energy intensive firms, there is no change in export prices, so they can't change the price, but they decrease they decrease the extensive margin and the intensive margin. So the adjustment is made with the 2 margins. For the non-energy intensive firm, there is an increase in export prices, but only the largest adjust their intensive and extensive margins. So there are two different strategies depending on the size of the firms. So we find significant changes in export pattern due to energy price variation. Here I repeat some results we have. The decision about the price, the quantity, the presence, the number of export markets differ across the firms. And in the paper we have also a part on the heterogeneity between export markets, but I don't have the time to present the result, but there is the paper. The paper is available if you are interested in this result. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for that very interesting talk. I think high energy prices and the impact on industry in particular, industry in global competition, and for all the export nations like Germany, where I am living, or France, where you're from, that is a really big problem. I've got a number of questions, and I would like to open the discussion to all of us. Maybe we can start a bit of discussion in here, because we've got so much more time. You've got the data you're using spans the 1.5 decades from 2001 to 2015. Do you have any idea, gut feeling, prognosis, or guess what would change in your analysis if you take into account the current energy crisis? Because now energy prices haven't just simply increased. I mean, they've gone through the roof quite quickly. If I mention just electricity prices in Germany, they jumped from 50 euros per megawatt out to 400, which is just crazy. And is that something that could be extrapolated from in your results, like linearly, or do you think there's a new qualitative effect in the sense that the export strategy or the export pattern is affected even more severely in a qualitative sense?
The problem with econometrics is that you must wait for the data, and So the current energy crisis is very new, and I'm not sure that for some firms it is possible to just adapt the strategy. So maybe with this my work, it will be interesting to see if there is a kind of limit on the increase or on the capacity to have a strategy to adapt to energy price increase. But there is a limit. After there is no possibility to adapt. So certainly currently there is no other strategy. Actually, we can see a strategy on substitution of energy.
Yeah.
So, but I guess that firms are lost, just lost. So there is a substitution, but we see the propagation of price increases, from an energy source to another. If there is a substitution, so the demand is increased for a new energy source, and then the energy, the price of this energy is increased a lot. So during in fact now, but during the last months, we could see the diffusion of the increase in prices, and certainly it's due to the substitution made by the countries, but also by the firms. So maybe now, if we don't have the individual data, but we could just see put assumption on the strategy of firms in terms of substitution, and maybe in terms of decrease of activity. I think that we don't have the figure now, the number now, so the data now. But we can follow certainly the price, the evolution of price, depending on the market and the energy sources, and put assumption on the substitution made by firms. Currently, that's it. After, we must expect the data, but not before maybe 1 year. But my guess is that some firms just wait to see how the price evolve, and in 1 year. In France, the specialists tell that in France we have a decrease in the demand of electricity, for instance, due mainly to the industry, because just there are closure of some industrial firms, and the question is there will be a reopening or not, and it depends if we find a means to decrease the prices. If the price is high as currently, the firm will be closed definitively. So we have maybe a few months to see if, well, to find a solution to decrease the prices for industry. In another way, the firm will remain closed.
Yeah, thank you very much for that expectation and mood. I can relate to that very much, because I'm working in an association representing energy-intensive industries, and in particular in Germany, we see the same problem. So we've got huge demand reduction in industry, which is mainly due to substitution of basic products or shutting down production lines and thus reducing GDP and also export value. I would be really curious to see how your model performs, or about the predictive power of your results if you feed it the data that you get from this crisis, maybe in 2024 or 2025. I'd be a litmus test for that, but also, I mean, in the best case, the model would just predict what happens, and I think that could serve as a very good estimation or basis also for policymakers, because they, as a policymaker, what you need is sound economic data, but what you usually get is lobbyists' feelings of what would happen, and those two
are the
same.
Yeah. A possibility will be to see, because we didn't look at that. Just I put again the increase in energy prices. So we see that there is a big increase, but it's during 15 years.
Yeah.
But it will be interesting, related to your question, will be to look at the closure of firms.
Mm-hmm.
During the period, because the period we see that there is a big increase in energy prices. How many firms just close, stop their activity, and for which level? Yeah. For a double of price or for multiple? So we could look at that, maybe if there are a threshold from which the closure have been massive or not. Yeah. It would be another work, but for the period, it would be interesting to see the sensibility of firms to the increase of energy price in terms of just death of firms.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, I've got this example of a German aluminium company. Probably you know that, Trimet, located in Hamburg, and they stopped production and started selling the electricity they bought before. So they for a short amount of time they switched from producing aluminium to selling energy, and thus surviving. But this only works for like half a year, 1 year, and after that you have to do something with your company. So this might be really, really interesting.
Yeah, currently the difficulty is the fact that there is no time to adapt, yeah. Except the closure. Okay, we stopped activity and we try to find option to decrease, to limit, but it's a question of time. If the solution are not found in 1 or 2 years, I don't know, but the time of the industrial times, but there is not a lot of time, and given the size, intensity of the shock, I'm not very optimistic, and I think that that's a big mistake of public authorities. So.
Yeah, right. It's a big challenge. I've got one more question. Maybe that's not as politically large as the one before, but you've had one slide where you show the heterogeneity and the spread of the energy costs per firm for a subset of your sample, and this one exactly, and that is quite large.
Yes.
Is there some sort of plausibilization or intuitive understanding why it is that big? Because usually when I talk to policymakers or companies in general, they always ask me, what's the price for electricity in Germany for industries? Where I say, yeah, it's not well defined, and it changes from company to company. But usually you'd think there's a spread of 10 to 20%, and in your slides, it's huge. So what are is it the fact that there is that people procure different sources of energy with different production marginal prices, or that they have different procurement strategies, like they buy on spot, or they've got sophisticated hedging strategies, or they buy on the futures market like 10 years in the future? Or is it just like unexplainable?
Yeah. In fact, I don't know exactly, because for me now it's I was very surprised the first time I see this kind of results. It was in a paper of Mathieu Crozet and a co-author, and I remember during a seminar I asked them, but why is so much variation in the same sector? And so we talk a little, and now it's no longer a surprise. So I didn't look at exactly the determinant of this variation, but yeah, I have in head now. There is more variation in intra than inter. So, and it's a very very frequent. I heard this result for another, I don't remember, but very recently as well. The explanation are the aggregation. So we aggregate different firms where there is a different kind of production. So the product have consequences on the energy consumption. So in terms of intensity, so yeah, you're right. There is a mixed difference in the energy mix, the age of equipment, and also the scope of the production. So we can have in the same sector, we can have firms where there is a large integration of the value chain, or other where there is just the last step of the value chain. So in fact, very different firms, but in the same sector. So it's not the same scope, but it's difficult to disentangle the firm depending on the step of the value chain which is integrated in the firm, in the firm in France. I'm not sure to be clear, but
I think I get the picture. But my first impression was, if there's such a huge dispersion in energy costs within the same type of firm sector or product category.
That you can have different contract as well, but here you have for a specific firm, what is the gas price? It depends also to your consumption, and so you mix and your intensity. Okay. It's a kind of aggregation of all that.
Okay, so
so if you consume less energy than your another firm, because just you produce at the end of the value chain, you have an impact on your natural gas price or electricity price.
Okay,
but maybe on the contrary, it's generally we see that the big consumer have a rather low price. So
my intuitive feeling was that if there's huge dispersion, maybe there are some inefficiencies in procurement and organization of energy trading or energy management at on the company level. So in addition to attacking the energy price versus export relation on a national economic level, policy level, there could be something on the macroeconomic level within this respective company, and in total that could increase the welfare in the sense. But this was just the idea that sparked when I saw that graph. Probably that's just too simplistic.
But I suppose that in the group where you mentioned a professional organization on aluminium, no?
Yeah, 3 minutes.
Certainly there are some firms with long-term contracts and another without. And I suppose that currently the difference of price are just huge. And so I'm not sure that it's efficient, or yes, some firms thought that it was not necessary to have a long-term contract, maybe, and another thought depend on on the people, on the history of the people, on the training, on many different things. So, and in fact, when you have a shock, some people are more ready than others. Why? Difficult to say. It's always the same thing for the shock.
Yeah.
But now it's very worrying.
Even more difficult to assess that.
Including for energy transition, because I read that there were projects for battery production, and now the project start to go to United States. So that's a big, very bad news.
Okay. We're almost done with the session, actually. So instead of 3 talks, we had 2 very interesting talks. Thank you very much for the discussion. I always like to read about new research proposals.
Can I make a remark to?
Yes, please.
Şevkat? I don't know the.
Sure. Yes.
Okay, so yeah, thank you very much for your interesting paper, and given the expected growth of extractive industry, that is important to find a regulation for this sector. And my view of the sector is corruption and environmental murderer, and so a lot of urgent need to regulate. So just it will be interesting maybe to show the number of merger and acquisition depending in the 2 groups, just to see what, because you see that there is a reduction of the deals depending on the group. It will interesting to have the mean or the distribution of the deal depending on the 2 groups to understand a little better the thing. And I wonder if, my view of this sector is a lot of corruption, and there is in France there was scandal Uramine, but I don't know if you know that, but it's big scandal with billion of euros public money which vanished. It's just crazy, and nobody is in jail. It's just crazy. But so I wonder if we can be confident in data you have, because if there is a culture of corruption or falsification of data, or how to be confident on the data given by the firms of this sector.
So if I understand your comment and question correctly, thank you very much for the last one. So you mean that how we can be more confident on the directions of the flows of mergers and acquisitions from an acquirer point of view where they are investing. So that's why it might be interesting to include to the model corruption index of host countries.
Okay.
Which we didn't do until now, but we could add this. So it's, I think, important point actually to introduce in the model. Then we can maybe extend the time period. So not from 2010 till 19, but even more. Then what we could see that the trend from the acquire side, the European countries, were they before in the past years investing in terms of numbers of mergers and acquisition to more corrupt countries. So that might be seen. And then after the regulation, so okay, then without control variable of corruption index, then we can already now see just within the implementation of the transparency regulation, the overall investments are reduced, but I can't say that now to which countries it's less or like more. Of course, like I have the data, but I mean, we don't present it yet, but thank you very much. It's a very nice point, because for a policy implication, actually it's important to interpret if you include also the corruption index.
Yes, certainly it will be interesting and important. And I don't know if you are informed. There is a database gathering the campaign of NGO on scandal in different sectors. And I read a paper on textile sector, which is this database, but I don't know if there is information for your work.
For the okay, I'll take you.
You know those database, you know. So it's a recent paper of Sandra Poncet and Pamina Koenig. Poncet, c'est P-O-N-C-E-T, and Koenig, I don't. So Pamina, it's on textile, if my memories are good, and they mention, they use, and they give the name of the database. The database is not free, but maybe it could be interesting to have information, maybe for your work. I don't know, but it's there, you know, in terms of there is an NGO which each year gives the number of
the news, the scandals,
murders connected to environmental issues.
Yes,
and there is more than 50% connected to mining sector.
Yes.
Yeah,
very interesting.
Yes, so maybe you could find information useful for this work.
Thank you very much. If we have time, so I will also make a comment for your studies. Very interesting. So what just came to my mind, so you present about, okay, the in France between 2001 to 15, the variation in the energy prices, and then how it impacts the energy cost of energy intensive and non-intensive industries. It might be interesting, then we discuss for today's current situation, energy crisis, energy prices, which it's not included in your model, but in future, of course, there will be many studies that we would consider. But so we can say that commodity prices, energy market is highly impacted by certain trends and changes and like events such as not right now happening. And we see that in Europe, how the market, for example, so highly impacted from one month to another. And between 2001 and 15, might be interested to include or mention what was happening during this period, like what type of certain industry-specific events.
During 2001, 2015?
Exactly.
To explain the increase of prices?
Yes, like some certain events. So for example, I would say that, okay, what happened globally? Okay, we could count on the financial crisis. This was impacting the market.
Yes.
But then for France specifically, might be interesting just to explain, because for today's crisis, okay, there are many arguments to explain, but for France in this study specifically in this period, maybe it's just nice to explain this in the very beginning.
But,
good idea.
Just say something about because you had this graph where you had the average price increase, and that was rather linear, and then had two spikes. One was in 2008 financial crisis, and one was in 2011. That was after the Fukushima disaster, when Germany
Yes.
shifted nuclear power, and we just took out 8 or 10 gigawatts of power from one day to the next, which had a price increase effect.
Yeah,
Yes,
and then the oil price collapsed end of 2014, like 15. So it was already like starting. So I think because commodity prices are highly impacted by such an event, so it's, I think, nice to mention, because also like there is a literature on it. So maybe you could include some of the, you know, from the prior literature, some comment. I think it's like nice to see, or even just a graph next to where you are showing this variation. Just mention this like 3 important.
We must remember, but yeah, very interesting, because when we make the simulation, it was not energy crisis, and now it's even. But just to remember, it's a period where there was the opening of the energy market. And with a group of firms, different group of firms, at the beginning, the large firms must find a deal for energy purchase, and then the medium, and then the small. So it will be interesting to see how the price has evolved for these firms, depending on the statute of there is a regulation on price or not. And during the period, we see there is a progressive integration of firms in the competitive sector, and with an increase, so completely in opposition with what we expect from a theoretical result. And yes, yeah, thank you. It will be interesting to add that. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the interesting discussion and the panel and the round table. It's always a pleasure if we can talk so much about our experience and the research that we're doing. We've had 3 members in the audience. That is also quite nice. Thank you very much for your attention. I don't think there are any questions at the moment. Otherwise, people would have put them in the chat. And with this, I'm going to close this session. I hope to see you again next year, probably live in presence and not via Zoom. That would be really great. So
thank you very much.
Have a nice weekend.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.